Hey, everybody. Thanks so much to Sam and Elizabeth for that wonderful singing workshop. That was just beautiful stuff. Always loved their work. And my name's Ian Gorman, here of La Luna Recording in Kalamazoo. Longtime Earthwork crony. I've worked on many Earthwork albums. I've been to the Harvest Gathering for many years, played there many times, ran sound there, the whole deal. And I'm here today to talk to you for a while about studio mixing techniques. Um, in addition to talking to you about it, I'm going to do some demonstrations with a beautiful song by Gifts or Creatures we've been working on. Well, specifically, it's a performance by Gifts or Creatures covering a song by Samuel Seth Bernard called Tree Skin. So we'll be working on that a little bit and demonstrating some things, as well as talking about the mixing process here. We are raising money for the Earthwork Farm, and you'll see a link down right below me. If you have the means, please consider donating via via PayPal or Venmo. We really appreciate it. There's a lot of work to be done there, and a lot of hardworking people that volunteer their time and pour their whole lives into the place. And so, but they need funds to get stuff done as well. And so, help grow this place that means so much to us and so many. And of course, give Bob a hand for his lifetime dedication to basically hosting a festival site at his home. So yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on the YouTube chat. Please, by all means, ask questions. Let's let this be a two-way street here. I have plenty of things to talk about and show, but I also want to address anything that you want to learn about here or questions that you have about anything I'm doing. So I'll do my best to keep an eye on the YouTube chat. Please go ahead and ask questions, and let's make sure that we're covering what you came here to learn. This is flexible and possible to get into whatever you want to check out. But yes, so let's just start talking about some theory about mixing and kind of the way that I view the process in the big picture. Mixing is both a technical and artistic process. And when I say that, I mean, of course, there's a lot of technical things that we're concerned with from an audio engineer perspective. But so much of it is subjective, and so much of it is really up to the tastes of the person doing it, both the engineer and the artist. With mixing, there is no right or wrong. There is, does it sound good to you? Is it what you're trying to do? And no two people are going to mix a song the same way. It's really an opportunity to put your own art into it, to put your own touch on it, and your own tastes, both for yourself, or if you're a professional engineer working for another artist, to reflect their tastes and their preferences with sound. So keep that in mind. This isn't a matter of just simply going through some knobs and plugins and making stuff sound better. It's a matter of what does better mean to you, and what are you trying to emphasize in a mix? What instruments are important to you? What are you trying to, what's at the heart of the song and the performance, and how are you representing that sonically? Um, with mixing, we're talking about the mixing process. So for any of you that might be newer to the studio process, there's three main parts of making a record, basically. The first one is tracking. Recording. Tracking is another word for recording. And that can be everything from having the whole band playing live together to doing instruments one at a time to any combination of the two. It is all tracking. Overdubs are another form of tracking where people are adding things onto something that's already been recorded and building it up from there. The second part of the process is mixing, where you're taking all of these recorded elements and you're really finessing how they gel together, both volume wise, tone wise, effects. You're adding that kind of thing. You're doing, all kinds of fine detail work to the tracks that you've already recorded. And then the third part of the process is mastering, which we won't be talking about today, but I also do mastering workshops as well. Hey, Seth, seeing you say hi, and hey, Elizabeth. Cool. So glad to have you two here. Seth, I don't know if you heard, but we're going to be working on Gifts or Creatures cover of Tree Skin today for a demonstration. So, a wonderful tune by Seth Bernard here who just chimed in. Hope you like it. I bet you will. So anyway, mastering is kind of the final polishing step after mixing, where you have everything already set with its relative levels to each other, and you're kind of putting a final polishing step on the established stereo mix to make it ready for the outside world, both in a technical and artistic way. So those are the three main parts. So by the time we start mixing, the song has already been tracked. It's already been recorded. And in the process of recording, you're also making a lot of sonic decisions there that impact your mix. When you're recording something, of course, the sound of the instrument is incredibly important. You're playing electric guitar. What pickup are you on? You know, what are your amp settings at? What kind of snare drum are you using? All of those kind of decisions, as well as the decisions you make in the recording process about microphone choice and placement. What microphone are you using? They all have very different sounds, and they can all kind of add or subtract different colors from what you're doing and that sort of thing, emphasize or de-emphasize different parts of the sound, both in your mic choice and mic placement. And then on top of that, there's also processing that you often do live while tracking a band. Sometimes you're doing some EQ or some compression as well while you're recording. So the reason that I bring all of this up is that when you're mixing, you're usually not starting from zero. You've already done some sonic work and made some decisions before now. And the quality of the tracks is incredibly important. To me, the analogy that I like to make with it is it's a lot like cooking. You need to have fresh ingredients if you're going to make a really great tasting meal. If your greens are a little stale, you can dress them up with spices, add on some salt, that kind of thing, make it a little better, but it's never going to be the same as having fresh ingredients. And it's very much the same with mixing. If your basic tracks aren't of high quality, you're only going to be able to fix stuff so far. You'll be able to improve it. You'll be able to make things better, but it's not going to be the same as if you'd start out with some great recorded tracks. So I'm just bringing that up because the mixing is not the start of the sonic decisions. It is a continuation of the sonic decisions. And what I will often tell people is great records aren't made in the mix, they're made in sound check. And what I mean by that is all those decisions you make live while you're recording, the sound of your instruments, the sound of your room, the microphones you're using, the way you're miking things, all of that has as much or more of an impact on the end result of what you're doing than anything you're going to do in the mixing stage. Obviously, there's a lot you can do in the mixing stage, but you need to have those fresh ingredients. So that's something to keep in mind. When you're recording, make sure you take time to listen back, to tweak your tones, to make sure things are sounding in the ballpark of how you want, so that by the time you get to the mixing stage, it's not a matter of having to fix a whole bunch of stuff. It's a matter of improving what's there, putting some polish on there, putting on some finesse, and taking it the rest of the way home. So, you know, like that old saying about what you can and cannot polish, if you know what I mean. So be mindful of that. So yes, and like I said, it's a very subjective process, and you can mix a song a lot of different ways. This can depend on your own personal tastes. And every engineer has their own sound. There's a reason why musicians go to certain engineers for mixing, and why often they'll mix and match and work with different people and that kind of thing. They're trying to get some of that sauce that only that one engineer can provide, and no two people make stuff sound the same way. So, you know, this is an incredibly powerful creative tool that you have as a mixing engineer. It is inevitable that you're going to be putting some of your own personality and your creative stamp in it. So don't hide that, provide that. You know what I'm saying? Lean into that. Make sure that what you're doing represents yourself as a sonic artist. And of course, most importantly, represents the artist whose music you're producing. You know, when you're an engineer working for an artist, it's more about what they want than what you want. Like, it's inevitable that you're going to be putting your own sonic stamp on it, but it's not your record, it's their record, and you're helping get what they want. And so that's a really important thing to think too. So you know, I work with a lot of artists that we have long time working relationships together. And a lot of times it's a partnership between us where they have a trust in me and I have some free range to be able to do my thing to it, but it's always deferring to them. If I put on an effect and they don't like it, that effect is gone. You know what I mean? So that's a really important way to think about stuff too, especially when you're working for other artists. Okay, so let's start talking about some nuts and bolts of mixing. Something that I think is a really important foundational thing to think about with mixing is that it's all about space. And when I say it's all about space, what I mean is spatial elements in your mix. And I don't mean reverb and stuff, although of course that's part of it. But I mean things working together and leaving space for each other. It's like a big puzzle piece, and everything has got to be fitting together in a way. Whether it is leaving space for carving out space for individual instruments by panning them to the left or the right or in the middle, of course, or anywhere in between, whether it's creating space by having some things feel really close and other things feel far away. And it's also quite importantly about space in a tonal sense, EQ wise, making sure that everything has got its own part in the mix. If you just try to take every instrument and make it sound as big as possible, it's going to end up like a bunch of mud. Things need to be able to find their spaces to work together and work together as a team in the mix. For instance, if I'm mixing a singer-songwriter and it's just guitar and vocal, I can get the biggest guitar tone in the world. It's got all the space in the world to be able to sound huge and fill up the frequency spectrum and stereo and all that stuff. If I'm doing a song that has a whole bunch of instruments on it, it's guitar and vocal and drums and bass and keys and all this stuff, I can't have that guitar take up the same space. If it did, it would be blocking everything else. You need to leave room for stuff. It's like the composition of a painting. You've got to, have different things be able to come out in their own way and leave room for each other. You can think about it a lot like yourself performing as a musician and arranging a song with a band. If everybody in the band is playing all the notes all the time, it's going to end up like mud, which maybe is awesome. Maybe you're doing some out there noise experimental stuff, and that's great. But a lot of times when you're arranging stuff, you're thinking about, okay, the keys are in this octave, so I'm going to play the guitar a little bit higher to leave room for the keys and that kind of thing, right? Working everything together. And mixing is very much the same thing. You got to leave room for each other and that sort of thing. And the analogy that I make about it being like a painting, I was thinking about it kind of compositionally, color-wise with a painting. There's also, when you're doing visual art, something that you think about a lot is kind of helping control the path that the eye takes through the painting or sculpture or whatever it is. And in sound, you can do the same thing. You can create focus on certain instruments, you can make other ones more supporting, and you can change those focuses throughout the song. Maybe the key part is playing a riff that's really important to the verses, but then the guitar is doing something that's a little more important on the choruses. And you're kind of very subtly finessing these instruments to kind of draw the listener's ear in different directions, as well as, of course, your stereo spectrum and left and right and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, movement, sonic movement going on and, doing stuff that suits the tune. And what this brings you to is what kind of story are you trying to tell with your mix? And what I mean by that is, what are you trying to emphasize or de-emphasize? A lot of mixing is about getting to the heart of a song or a performance and figuring out what makes it compelling. What is the thing you want to focus on? Is it the vocal? Is it the rhythm section? Is it the bass groove? Is it the guitar riff? Is it the string section? What is it? What is the thing that you really want to emphasize, or multiple things? Now, when I say this, you might think, well, I want to hear everything in the mix. Well, of course you do, but I'm not talking about being able to hear everything. I'm talking about those subtle little differences that help kind of control the path of the listener's ear and emphasize or de-emphasize certain parts of the song. If you start listening to music critically as a mixing engineer, you'll hear that people are emphasizing different stuff all the time. And of course, in a professional quality mix, you can hear everything, but what is really the anchor of the tune and what is being emphasized? Another analogy, I make a lot of analogies to different artistic mediums, because to me there's so much to learn from each other, and so much of it kind of blends into each other. You think about lighting with videography or photography. What are you drawing the eye to, that sort of thing. And so you think about that with music as well. If I'm working with a singer songwriter, a lot of times the heart of the song are the lyrics, and so I want to make sure that the vocal is presented in a way that's always demanding the listener's attention. And I don't just mean that in the way of volume, like making it real loud. I'm talking about carving out room for it so that everything else is supporting that vocal and working around it. It's not like you have the music and you just lay the vocal on top. It's this symbiotic relationship, and so everything's got to work together. Something that I've found, it's quite common when you're finishing up a record to also print instrumental mixes of the songs, whether the artist is doing trying to get licensing deals or that kind of thing. It doesn't happen a lot with independent artists, but it's certainly not uncommon to be printing instrumentals. If your mix, if the song that you're working on is anchored by the vocalist and the lyrics, and you take that out, when you're listening to the instrumental mix, a lot of times there's a ghost of it there in a way. And I don't mean you're still hearing it. I mean, you can hear its absence because you hopefully correctly carved out everything around it and that sort of thing. So I would implore you, when you're putting together a mix, to think about this kind of stuff. What is leading the way? What are the elements or element that you're really trying to highlight in what you're working on? Let's see. Looking at some notes. Another thing that's really important is mixes will differ not just based on your own tastes and your own artistic sensibilities, but on the style of music. If you're an engineer that is working with clients, I highly recommend that you spend some time listening to music outside of what you're innately drawn to. It's a great skill it's good just for all musicians to listen to a whole variety of stuff, of course, but the way that you mix a rock song, and the way that you mix a hip hop song, and the way that you mix a jazz song, and the way that you mix a folk song, etc., all of these have really different kind of conventions and balances that tend to be relayed in a lot of the seminal work of all of these genres. It's really important to be familiar with that, both so that you can follow it, and so that when you decide to go outside of those conventions, you're doing so purposefully and knowingly. The old learn the what was the term? Learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist, kind of thing. But in different kinds of music, for instance, vocals are treated very differently. Even just thinking the basics, like volume wise, the vocal in a singer-songwriter roots folk song is going to be significantly louder than the vocal in an indie rock song, for instance, that sort of thing. And so it's helpful to listen to different stuff, whether it's just on your own, just for fun and checking stuff out, listening to what's going on, or whether it is like, okay, this song has some EDM elements in it. I'm going to listen to some EDM music as a reference to kind of think about how that kick and snare is sitting in my mix, or whatever, that kind of thing. There's a lot of difference with genre and style. And obviously a lot of the musicians, especially in the Earthwork world, jump around from genres, which I love very much, because that's how I think of music a lot of the time too. But, like I say, it's good to know kind of the common standards in different styles, so that you can knowingly either follow them or mess with them. Cool. So let's check out a song and start to think about think about some of this stuff in practical terms. And I'm going to walk you through kind of how I start to put mixes together. So let's see here. We're going to get this up on the screen here. Oh, thanks, Joe. I appreciate that. I forgot where I got that quote from. It's not mine, but I'm happy to repeat it. I don't know who said it originally. But yeah. Okay, so the song that we're working on today is by wonderful Michigan duo called Gifts or Creatures, Brandon and Bethany Foote. Great friends of mine, and we've worked together in the studio and and live for many years. Love them very much, and they have some wonderful albums out. I highly recommend checking out Gifts or Creatures. Let's see. Hey, well, let me finish telling you about that. They are covering a song by Seth Bernard named Tree Skin. And this is a song that we recorded a couple years ago on my 2-inch tape machine and then transferred to Pro Tools for mixing. And we never got around to mixing it. There was a series for a while called Earthwork Covers Earthwork, and this was going to be for that, and we just never quite finished it up. So we're going to work on it here today. Let me take a moment and tell you about the audio feed that we have going on. I am not going to be, never mind all that. Okay, we got high quality audio going. Let's check out a little bit of this tune. So, like I said, Gifts or Creatures covering Seth Bernard's Tree Skin. As you can see, I got pretty much a fresh slate here, but we did do a little EQ and compression and stuff during the original tracking session, and it went to tape, which added, of course, a certain sound to it. But let's hear what we're starting out with. Through the audio stream. You got it. Okay. Awesome. All right. Had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old machinery. How about now? People hearing it yet? If you're gonna cut down a tree and saw it up, make it into a thing of beauty. As I grow wiser with my age, I will find words to fill the empty page. True to the man who raised me. But now I see the skin of a tree and leave the empty page. Leave the page empty. I'm sorry, Betty, can you say that one more time to me? Okay, the echo should be better now. I can see the sunlight outside inside that made the green leaves greener. I see the bugs that made the bark taste good, and the saw that turned the trees to wood into lumber and then pulp and then newspaper. Written on the front page, our country's filled with fear and rage. Rage and fear have crashed into our country. The hope is the green and the leaves of the trees, so I fill my empty pages with the hope that fills me. All right. Cool. Great. So everybody got a chance to check out what we're working with here. Beautiful, beautiful performance by Brandon and Bethany. And of course, beautiful tune and tone by Seth here. And thanks to Ben for helping me get that figured out there on the fly. Like I said, this is all brand new. I was trying to combine a high quality audio stream with the Zoom video. So thanks to Ben for the help with that. If this was Harvest Gathering, we'd be giving him a round of applause right now. So, awesome. And also thanks to Steve Lee for chiming in on some text here and giving me some feedback about it. So awesome. Great. It's working. Let's work on the mix. So let's first talk about what elements are here and what we've got to work with. Let me go ahead and blow up my screen a little bit. So the percussion is all a drum machine that we have a kick and a snare of. And they're both hitting at the same time. If we solo them up, you'll start to hear here. You can see them at the top of the screen. Here's the kick. and the snare, both together. So that's our rhythm section for this track. Obviously a little unconventional compared to, you know, if you had a drum set playing or something like that. But yeah, that's our rhythm there. And then let's see here. I'm going to rearrange a couple things on my screen to just help my visual brain. Sometimes when you're starting a mix, it can help to kind of lay stuff out in a way that makes sense to either left to right or top to bottom. If it's a song you've been working on, it might already be laid out that way. If it's files somebody sent you, you might have to do a little work for that. Often I kind of lay out my tracks sort of foundation up. So, you know, you can do whatever works for you. There's no right or wrong, but I start with the drums and then I go to bass after that. This track here is muted. This was kind of an experimental effects track that we're running on the pedals that we decided not to use, but I'm keeping it in the session here just in case, and in case you're curious. Let's see. We're messing with a little pedal board delay kind of thing on the drums in there, but we never quite got that to a point that we're happy with it, so we're not even going to use that in the mix. I'm just going to mute that for now. And then after that, there's a bass here, which we got, let's see, bass guitar it sounds like. And then Brandon's main rhythm electric guitar, which is on 2 tracks here. We did it with 2 amps in stereo, which is often how we record Brandon's guitar. Check it out. So he'll be running like a stereo tremolo effect, and we'll run it to 2 amps and mic up both of the amps. And you can hear there's a little bit of reverb on there. We were running reverb live. I'm a big fan of running guitar effects live. Some people, you know, when I work with them in the studio, they ask, should I just record my guitar clean and should we add everything later? And yeah, sometimes there's a good reason to do that. But, you know, to me, most of the time, I like to get the sound up front. And if you got pedals that you like, if you got amp reverb that you like, go for it. I say, I want those sounds right away. You know, why record the guitar clean and then try to emulate an amp reverb you really like later, you know? Plus, if you're playing guitar or any instrument, of course, but if you're playing guitar and you've got pedals going, whether it's, you know, reverb, tremolo, fuzz, whatever you got going on, it's going to affect the way that you play a little bit. If I'm playing guitar with a fuzz pedal on, I'm going to play it totally differently than if I'm playing it clean, right? A little aside from here, the next workshop after mine is Jordan Hamilton talking about his creative use of pedals, which is really incredible. If you don't know Jordan, he is a brilliant cellist and rapper and singer, and he does some fantastic looping stuff with his pedal board and that kind of thing. So stick around for that. So anyway, so there's Brandon's guitar, which we recorded with some amp reverb, some pedals, all that good stuff. And then after that, we have Bethany's Wurlitzer. Let's check out what we got here. Cool. Now, I don't remember whether this is a direct signal or we mic'd up an amp. This was a while ago, and I don't have notes about that in this session. I'm sure I do somewhere, but not in front of me. It doesn't matter. We're just working with what sounds good to us, right? So sometimes when you record instruments, you just take the cable right into your recording equipment, and that's called recording direct. And other times you will run it through an amplifier, or you'll mic the acoustic instrument, and that is, of course, miking an amp or an acoustic instrument. Sometimes you do both. So you have a combination of sounds, so you have different choices and that sort of thing. In this case, my guess is that we ran a pair of amps and mic'd them, just knowing how we normally do stuff. But this is our Wurlitzer sound here. So, you know, the thing about Gifts or Creatures is that at the heart of the duo is guitar and Wurlitzer. That is the main instruments on most of what they do. Occasionally on their records, they have some acoustic piano or, you know, some acoustic guitar, that kind of thing. But Electric guitar and Wurlitzer is really kind of the signature combination of tones of the band. So, thinking about that in the mix here, that's going to be at the center. And of course, we'll get some more instruments in here, but that's the main thing in this song anyway. But it's something I just want to be mindful of. Those aren't little subtle things. That's the heart of Gifts or Creatures here. So here's what the guitar and Wurlitzer sound like together. Lovely. Cool. Then let's see what else we got. After that, we have what's called a Nashville tuned guitar, or some people call it high strung. We're all high strung these days, aren't we? The Nashville tuning is a great studio trick that I really love. What Nashville tuning basically is if you're familiar with 12-string guitar tuning, it is basically all of the high strings from a 12-string. So your E and your A and your D, your three low strings, are all the same octave as a regular guitar, if I'm getting that right. I think that's right. And then your G, B, and E are all an octave up. So it's high strung. It's a real high pitched, it's half of the guitar is an octave up from a normal guitar. So let's check it out. Very chimey. Now, this is two different passes of the Nashville guitar. We did pass 1 in mono, and then we did pass 2 in mono. So it's two guitar performances with kind of the intention of this being a studio production thing where we would pan them left and right and just add a little sparkle on the edges. This is a great production trick in the studio to just add a little sparkle to things, that kind of thing. It can also be really cool to combine a regular acoustic guitar with a Nashville tuned acoustic guitar. And then it's kind of like a 12-string, but it's actually two different performances. So the differences between it are more nuanced and layered and a little more complex. So here's our Nashville guitars. Almost sounds like a dulcimer or something up there. So we just have that on the choruses. And then after that, there's a couple different synth passes. There's one here that we decided not to use. I'm just going to go ahead and mute that. And then here's another synth pass that is what we'll often call in the audio world a pad, as in just kind of like big old chords, just kind of filling up some space as sort of an atmospheric addition. Sweet. So that's just in there for a little flavor that we're going to add, a little kind of, you can see it comes in like at the second verse. So the idea is it's a new flavor to kind of come in to elevate things in the second verse. And then we have vocals. Both Brandon and Bethany's vocals were doubled. So they each sang twice, and you can hear that here.
My father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew.
So this is two performances from Brandon. There's no effects on it. It's just him singing it twice.
He said, if you're gonna cut down a tree and saw it.
And same thing with Bethany.
Make it into a thing of beauty.
Now, doubling is an effect that you'll hear on a lot of records. A lot of people love it because it sounds really cool. And some people use it all the time. If you're an Elliott Smith fan or a Modest Mouse fan, it's hard to find a song of theirs that doesn't have vocal doubling. The Beatles used it a ton. I mean, a million artists have used it. And it sounds like an effect, and sometimes when you hear that kind of thing, it might be an effect. It might be a little delay or reverb or something, but a lot of times it's just simply singing the thing twice. And this is a great, simple production tool that you can use to add a little bit of flavor to a vocal. And you can mix it in all kinds of different ways. You can mix it so that the two doubles are equal, and sometimes you pan them out and do something that's real symmetrical. And other times it's kind of like there's one vocal that's really the main lead vocal, and the other one is just kind of behind it, like just sort of an effect, like a little halo around the vocal. So we did that with both of their vocals. And then at the end here, we have a guitar solo. There's a take here that we're not using, so I'll mute that. And then we have a guitar solo that we did on separate tracks. We did this on tape, and Brandon originally played through, like if you go up and check out his electric guitar track, he played all the way throughout the tune, but we muted, we ended up doing the solo on a different track and then muting the rhythm guitar when the solo guitar comes in. So it's still kind of the live arrangement of one guitar playing through, but it just happens to switch to a different set of tracks for the solo. We did this on tape, so it made sense to put it on different tracks for just the process of recording the tape, as well as in case we decided to change our minds later and wanted to have that rhythm guitar back in. But it can also be a really helpful thing in a mix to have certain different elements of an instrument on different tracks. For instance, in this case, we have a rhythm guitar and then the lead guitar, the solo, and I'll play you just a little bit of that so you can hear what I'm talking about. So he's got a different tone here going anyway, and we're probably going to mix it quite a bit different than the rhythm guitar. We're most likely going to mix it different volume-wise because it's a solo and it steps out a little bit. It might also need different tone work or reverb or whatever have you in the mix. So sometimes just putting that on a separate track to begin with is way easier than programming a bunch of changes when that different sound comes in. And you can do that by either recording it to a different set of tracks or in whatever DAW you're in, you can always duplicate your tracks and have a new pair and just move the solo over to that or whatever have you. Sometimes with a singer, you might want the vocals on the chorus on a different set of tracks. You can treat it differently without having to program all those changes all the time. And then finally, the last, well, I guess there's two more things. We were running a tape delay live for just a little effect on the vocal. I don't know whether we'll use this in the mix or not. Maybe we'll try recreating some effects so you can kind of see that process. But we have an Echoplex tape delay that we were running live just, because I love the sound of it, and that way we could have some analog delay going on live. And so we recorded that in case you want to use that in the mix.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up.
We'll turn it off.
He built it out of old machinery.
So a little bit of delay. We'll see whether we decide to use that analog tape delay in the mix or not, or whether we reconstruct something else. Might be more instructive to reconstruct something else right now. And then finally, I have the whole stereo mix here. Long story short, without getting too much into technical DAW routing stuff, I like to print the mix back into the session so that I've got a copy of it here for a whole variety of reasons. So that's what you're seeing there. So it's a fairly stripped down arrangement here. There's a few bells and whistles on top of their natural arrangement as gifts or creatures. But, drums, bass, guitar keys, vocals, and then a synth and some Nashville guitars. So that's basically our arrangement. So let's give it a listen again and think about where to start putting this thing together.
My father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old machinery.
Cool. So just a quick note in case anybody's just joining us. If you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put it in on the YouTube chat. I'm keeping an eye open on that. Also, we are trying to raise some money for our beloved Earthwork farm, and you'll see at the bottom of the screen here PayPal and Venmo links. If you have the means, please chip in a little bit. It sure will go to a great cause and help out a whole bunch of people. Normally the harvest gathering in person, there's a whole lot of fundraising activities for the farm. Obviously this year we can't do that. So we're doing what we can virtually to try to keep the flow going up there. Cool. So putting together a mix. Now, most of you tuning in here are probably musicians and have probably been at shows and stuff like that where you're sound checking. They're like, all right, give me the kick drum. And then you just hit the kick drum for a minute and they tweak it. All right, give me the snare drum. Work down the line like that. Bass, electric guitar, blah, blah, blah. I don't like to put things together that way. I like to kind of start with the big picture and start thinking about the whole song together. I will certainly go in and solo stuff and get into the detail work, but like I was saying before, hearing how everything fits together is really important to me to kind of deciding on how I'm going to approach a mix and what it needs. Excuse me. The idea of starting working on a mix that has a vocal that is really important to it, as most vocals are in songs, just sounds kind of crazy to me. Like I don't want to start building a mix and then slap the vocal on it, like I can't think of a good analogy right now, but I want to think about that vocal and how it's relating to everything from the beginning. So in this song, the vocal is really important. The lyrics are quite important, and to me, the beat in this is something maybe I want to take back a touch. If this was a drum set or something, maybe I might want to have the groove be a little bit more present. But because this is such kind of a repetitive, drum machine kind of thing, don't get me wrong, I want it to be audible and, kind of helping propel the song. But, it should be supporting the other instruments instead of the other way around. So let's give a listen here and start to think about some of these elements.
My father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up.
Okay, so I'm going to start just kind of sketching in some balances here. I'm going to bring up the vocals a little bit.
He said, if you're gonna cut down a tree and saw it up, make it into
A little more whirly.
of beauty.
And then I'm going to bring down the drums just a touch.
As I grow wiser with my age, I will find words to fill the empty page. True to the man who raised
So, I want to make some decisions about the vocals right off the bat because they're so important to the tune here. The first thing I want to think about is the panning of the vocals. I find it's often very helpful to think about panning early in a mix because once you start panning stuff around, it changes things. It changes the volume relationships and the tone relationships between instruments. So if you're deep into the mix, like in the home stretch of a mix, and you start moving around your pan faders, it is going to throw a lot of things off balance. And, sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you're in the home stretch and you have a creative idea that you want to follow. But often it also means some backtracking for that reason. So I like to kind of, at the very least, sketch in my panning from the beginning. If I have these vocals all in the middle, that's going to change what's going on in the mix versus if I pan them out some. So let's think about that. What does it sound like if we pan? Let's start with Brandon's vocals because he has the melody and Bethany has the harmony, at least I think.
father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up.
So there's panning out Brandon's vocals. I'm starting, about 60-60 on it. What if we go 100%? Here it is back in the middle. I like it panned out. Maybe not 100%. That sounds a little disassociated from the rest of the track to me. And there are some tools that we have to take stuff that is hard panned and, tie it back into what's going on in the middle. But I'm kind of liking that like 60-60 sort of thing on Brandon's vocal.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I
And check it out. The volume is different now that I have it panned. The volume fader is staying the same, but if you listen to it, when I have it panned, it sounds louder because all of a sudden it is popping out of the mix more. It is more noticeable. It's attracting more attention to itself. If I put it back in the middle, it's going to sound a little quieter.
father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up.
Back to panned.
Built it out of old
Listen to that volume difference with me doing nothing but panning it. This is why I'm saying it's really important to start to think about your panning early because that's going to change all kinds of things. So cool. I might need to bring his vocals back down a little touch. What about Bethany's vocals? We had her in the middle before, which might work nice. Brandon kind of off to the sides and Bethany in the middle. But what if we pan Bethany, maybe like part way, maybe about 30-30.
father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old machinery. He said, if you're gonna
What if we pan her farther out and get closer to matching Brandon?
make it into a thing of beauty. As I grow wiser,
What about back in the middle?
I will find words to fill the empty page.
Back to panned out.
raised me. But now I see the skin of a tree and me.
Cool. So when it comes to panning vocals, the thing that I find, when I'm talking about panning vocals, I mean specifically when you have multiple singers, when you have harmony vocals going on, if you pan them together with the lead vocal, it blurs them together more and makes it sound kind of more like one instrument, one chord, if you will. Whereas if you pan them out, you get a little more individual discernibility with the voices. And of course, there is no right or wrong here. This is a creative choice and kind of how you want to present the song. A lot of times, you know, I'm working on something where I want that blend. I want it to be a little blurry, and other times I want it to be real clear. Like, oh, here's a second voice that is real discernible on its own. In this case, I like the blur between Brandon and Bethany and kind of having their voices panned on top of each other, left and right.
My father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old
If I put Bethany back to the middle,
He said, if you're gonna cut down a tree and saw it up, make it into a thing.
I feel like I hear Bethany clearer here, which maybe that's the way you want to go with your mix. Maybe you like that element. For me, I kind of like the idea of them being a little blurred together and creating, you know, kind of that harmony, you know, the chord together kind of thing. So
Had a sawmill on the farm
I'm going to readjust my balances now that I have my panning sketched in.
out of old machinery. He said, if you're gonna cut down a tree and saw
So here's a good opportunity to talk about another element of harmony mixing besides panning. The volume balance between harmony vocals can be a really important creative tool. And the way that I kind of think about it as a shorthand is the song more of a duet or more of like a lead vocal with a harmony on it? And when I'm thinking of a duet, I'm thinking of the vocals being much more equal in volume. If I'm thinking about the lead vocal and then the harmony kind of tucked in, it'll be weighted towards the lead, obviously, and the harmony vocal being, you know, kind of a color on top of the lead vocal. So let me show you some examples of that.
My father had a sawmill.
So I would consider this more of a duet style mix.
He built it out of
Whereas if I want to mix Bethany to be a little bit more like harmony style mixing,
cut down a tree and saw it up, make it into a thing of beauty.
so this might be closer to how I'd mix the song
My age I will find
if I wanted it to be like Brandon as the lead singer and Bethany singing a harmony part that is supposed to support the lead.
Now I see the skin of a tree and
But
leave the empty
I like them being a little more equal,
leave the page empty.
kind of intertwining a little bit more, you know? I like that blur. I think that's a really great sound for Brandon and Bethany with them being, you know, I wouldn't say 100% equal. The melody, maybe I'm giving just a tiny bit of a bump over the harmony, but I want it to be both of them really present and their harmony really kind of being anchored in the tune here. So let's zoom back out. I don't just mean on my screen. I mean mentally zoom back out from the vocals and think about the whole song again. So you'll notice my workflow here as I start working through this. I'm not focusing on one instrument and getting that perfect and going on to the next one. I'm bouncing around a lot because everything relates to everything else. And I want to kind of keep carving this in from different angles, sketching it in, whatever the analogy you want. So I'm going to zoom back out and start thinking about some other elements.
My father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old machinery.
Cool. I'm going to jump ahead to where the bass comes in.
As I grow wiser with my age, I will find words to fill the empty page.
So I'm doing a little rebalancing now that I've got those vocals kind of panned out how I like.
See the skin of a tree and leave the empty page.
Maybe I bring the vocals down together just a little bit. Great. So, cool. I'm going to start to think about some reverbs now. I like to think about reverbs early in the process too, because if you're using some reverbs that can change the kind of tone and feel of the instruments that are getting a little reverb to them. So let's see here. I'm going to think about just a little bit of reverb on the drum machine. I'm not sure. A lot of mixing is trying stuff out and seeing what you like. In this case, I kind of want to, maybe the drum machine sounds really good real dry, sounding maybe a little bit more like a direct drum machine as it is. But I'm curious what just a touch of reverb on it sounds like. And the thing about reverb is sometimes reverb is real obvious. It's a big trail, hello, a big hall or a big plate sound, something like that. Plate is a term you'll hear a lot in reverb circles, where if you're not familiar with it, it comes from an old school analog form of getting reverb, which is a big metal plate in this huge rectangular box that will actually vibrate, and you'll pick up the vibrations from that plate. And it is a classic vocal sound on tons of albums, still used today. A lot of studios still have plates. I would love to have one here at La Luna, but they ain't cheap. So one of these days, but there's also tons of plugins that emulate plate sounds. It's a classic vocal sound. But anyway, sometimes it's a big, obvious reverb. A lot of times you're using reverbs and delays in a mix in very subtle ways, in ways that wouldn't catch your ears, like, oh, there's an effect on that. But something real subtle just makes something sound a little three-dimensional, or to make it kind of sit in the mix in a certain way. So I want to think about that with this drum machine. So I'm going to bring up a reverb here. This is one that we had on early on in the process. I'm going to check this out and see where we were at. So you'll see here, now I'm using Pro Tools. You might be using Pro Tools. You might be using Logic. You might be using Studio One, all kinds of stuff out there. The stuff that I'm showing you is not by any means directly related to Pro Tools. These are techniques and approaches that can relate to any DAW that you're using. And, maybe the thing is called, the knob is called something different in your DAW, or, maybe, it's in a different place or something like that. But the analogy that one of my great friends and audio mentors, John Campos, told me, he was talking about mixing boards especially, but this is the same deal with DAWs, is that the analogy is it's like driving a car. If you're getting in a car that you haven't been in before, that there's got to be a turn signal, there's got to be a stick shift, or, there's got to be, an adjustment for your mirrors, all that. The question is, where is it? And it's the same deal if you're going to a new mixing board or a new DAW or anything. All those elements are the same. They all do very similar stuff at the end of the day. It's just a matter of figuring out what that thing is called in your DAW or where it is. So anyway, I'm in Pro Tools, but this stuff relates to any DAW that you're in. It's the same process and same kind of way to think through things. So when I add a reverb, I don't usually just put it on that channel. I will put it on an aux track, short for auxiliary track. I'll put it on its own fader, basically, and then send stuff to it. I do this for a variety of reasons. For one thing, it gives me more control over the dry and wet signals. Instead of having to move a dry, wet knob, I have two different faders that I can kind of adjust and do different things with. It means that I can add effects. I can alter the sound of the reverb if I want to. All kinds of flexible possibilities with it. Also, a lot of times when I'm using a reverb on a tune, I'm not just using it on one thing. I might be, but a lot of times it is being shared by different elements. I'm basically trying to treat it sort of like you would room mics if you're recording people in a room where a bunch of different stuff are kind of getting some of that sauce on it. So if you set it up as its own fader, then all of a sudden it's super easy to send multiple things to it. So when I'm setting up a mix, I will often have what I call a room reverb. Pro Tools abbreviated to ROM reverb, but it's actually room reverb. A lot of times I think of that as a shorter, more natural reverb that is not there to sound like a big effect, but just add a little three-dimensionality. I might also very well have a larger reverb that's supposed to be a little bit washier or something like that. But let's start with a smaller room reverb. So I'm setting it from bus 3 and 4 in Pro Tools. Your DAW might have a different, you might call it an aux send or whatever. In Pro Tools, they call these buses. I'm going to start and send the kick and snare to it equally, although maybe I'll give myself a little headroom there. And let's hear what this reverb sounds like, this room that I had on before. Just kind of a medium-sized wooden room kind of vibe here. And let's solo it up so we can hear it real well. So look, this is a real small reverb. If I turn it off, I have it cranked to demonstrate. Back on here. Very tiny. It's the kind of thing that I might use just for a little three-dimensionality in there. You know, I'm not trying to make that drum sound reverby. I'm just trying to put it in a space. But, you know, let me experiment with some other spaces. This is a setting here on Altiverb that I love very much. I use for all kinds of things. Much bigger reverb. On this drum, it sounds a little shinier, a little brighter. I don't know that I like it on this drum. Let's see what else we got. Ooh, I kind of like that. Now, what I'm listening for isn't just the tail of the reverb. It's kind of what it does to the tone. Listen to this reverb setting here. I'll bounce over to the other one I was just on. This one sounds a little thinner to me, a little flatter somehow, which is funny. This reverb sounds really warm and rich on all kinds of things to me, but it's always a relationship between that effect and that instrument. And one size does not fit all. Sometimes a reverb will sound great on one thing and horrible on something else. And it's not even instrument dependent. I might record a drum set that this reverb sounds great on, and then another one that doesn't fit it at all. Listen to that tone change. This one's a little bit richer, and I like that. But I don't think I'm going to have it this loud. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. Now let's unsolo it.
I can see the sunlight side and side.
Now this is an important lesson. When you are working on anything in a mix, be careful about digging too deep into the details when you're soloed. When you have something soloed. Because, once again, this goes back to what I talk about time and time again. It's all about the relationships between everything and about things carving out space for each other. And when I unsoloed this drum machine, all of a sudden the reverb was way less noticeable in the mix than it was when I had it soloed. You know, maybe it helps to solo it to pick your reverb, that kind of thing, but don't worry about fine-tuning it. When I unsolo it, it's going to change. So unsolo that instrument and then figure out your details about your reverb level, right? So right now it's real clear because it's just by itself at the beginning of the song.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew.
And now the rest of the song is eating up a lot of that reverb. I still might turn it down a little bit. I want it to be subtle.
He said if you cut down a tree and saw it up, make it into a thing of beauty.
Now let's try turning it off.
As I grow wiser with my age, I will find words to fill the
Back on.
true to the man who raised me. Now I
Cool. I like that. It's real subtle. I don't want this drum to sound like it's in a big hall or something, but just a little touch of something just to make it a little three-dimensional and pop out. So when I'm talking about soloing stuff, you know, something that is a mistake that I made earlier in my career that a lot of people I know make is like, all right, say for instance, you are recording something and you have a string section. You solo up the strings and you'll labor over all of those balances between the strings. You get the cello and the viola and violin and the you know, the bowed bass, if there's one in there, get all that the blend just right with the idea that you got it soloed. You'll be able to do all those little details and then you'll put it in the mix and it'll be great. But what happens most of the time is then when you put it in the mix, all those balances change. Everything feels different because certain frequencies are competing with other instruments and that sort of thing. You know, much of the time what happens is the bass is way less noticeable when you put it back into the mix because there's a bunch of other instruments competing with the low end. Honestly, a lot of the time, it's kind of a waste of time to solo something and do too much detail work to it. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of reasons to solo stuff and dig in deep into the details, but if you're worrying about the balances and that kind of thing, zoom back out, put it back into the mix, and then fine-tune those balances, because that's what matters. It doesn't matter what it sounds like soloed. If you take it back into the mix and that thing you're working on all of a sudden isn't noticeable anymore, or the balance changes because there's other instruments competing with those frequency ranges. So soloing stuff is a very powerful tool, but don't go too far down that road. Always step back out, always look at the big picture, see how it's fitting in the mix.
Father had a sawmill on the farm.
Cool. So you'll notice this is a great example of what I'm talking about. When the rest of the band comes in, that reverb gets way less noticeable. So you know what I'm going to do? I am going to automate the volume of that reverb. I think it's too much when the drum's by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and go to, oh, let's see here. What am I doing? Okay, hold on a second. I had something routed weird, but I just fixed it. It sounds like too much to me at the beginning of the tune, so I'm going to go ahead and lower the send to the reverb here just when the drum's by itself and let it come back up when the band comes in. Cool, except I did that at the wrong spot. Let me do that once again here. It's actually there. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing a fader move, basically a move, if this is a mixing board, it'd be the aux send to the reverb. Now check it out. To me, in the mix now, this sounds the same. I'm not hearing the reverb level louder in the beginning. It sounds consistent to me. Now, since we're zoomed in on it and we're thinking about it, you might, consciously hear the change because you know that it's there. But if you are just listening to this song, it sounds really consistent to me now. My father had a sawmill on the farm. So check it out. What we're doing here is something that we do all the time in mixing, which is that we are doing something to make something sound like we're not doing anything. The whole trying to make it look easy kind of thing. Or I guess the analogy that's close to my heart is if you're at a show and you start noticing the sound person, the chances are the sound person's not doing a good job. If you don't notice the sound person, they're doing a great job. And so in mixing all the time, we're doing these little adjustments to make it sound like we're not doing anything. I can't tell you how many times musicians come to me and they go, we just want it to sound natural. We don't want to do anything to it. And it's like, well, a lot of times you have to do a lot of stuff to make it sound like you're not doing anything. It's the same thing like, with lighting. If you're trying to take photographs of something, well, yeah, you want to stand in front of a fluorescent light, it's going to be very real, isn't it? But it's not going to be very flattering. And it may not feel like how you want. Like there's an emotional reality apart from our mental reality. What do things feel like? And what is the vibe like? What is the mood like? That kind of thing. If you're getting your portrait taken, you want some lighting that some diffuse lighting or something that really kind of like it makes it look really natural, but it's also intentional and it's different than just shining a bright light on something. There is what is technically natural and what feels natural, and a lot of times you're having to do these little things to try to try to keep stuff sounding like you aren't doing anything. So cool. Let's keep moving here. Let's think about, so I've got a little short reverb going that got these drums too. A lot of times I like to think of reverb as a little bit of glue in a mix where maybe I'll send some other instruments to the same reverb as a way to kind of sonically connect them in a way. So what happens if we also just give a little bit of the guitar and Wurlitzer to this same reverb? Now, of course, the guitar already has a reverb on the amp. So this isn't a reverb that's supposed to replace that or compete with that. This is a real subtle kind of like, let's just try to make it sound like they're in the same space a little bit. So I just dragged over my reverb send here to the guitar and whirly. Now let's turn off the reverb. Back on. Maybe just a little bit more on the guitar and whirly. Back off. Back on. So it's a subtle difference, but to me, in my headphones, I'm noticing it. It is making things sound a little bit rounder, a little more, I keep saying three-dimensional, but that's just the word that comes to mind when I think about this. It makes it sound a little bit less studio flat and a little bit more like people together in a room. Now, you can do this in all kinds of ways. I'm doing it very subtly because I want this song to still sound pretty dry, at least with the instruments, relatively. You can do this with a larger reverb, of course, something with a lot bigger tail on it. Tail is, kind of how long it takes the reverb to decay. You know, you can do things in a more obvious way, but a lot of times these subtle little things are the difference between that, you know, that extra few percentage points that can really make something pop. So I'm going to mentally zoom back out now and think about some effects on the vocals also. Let's see here.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up.
Cool. So I'm going to set up a different reverb on the vocals. This is real common to kind of the way that I do reverb a lot of the time. We could try sending it to that same reverb, you know, and maybe that works great. But, you know, it's sitting in such a different place in the mix, just kind of attention and focus wise, that I want to have some separate control over the reverb on the vocals. So I'm going to give myself a reverb, and then I'm also going to give myself a delay. Once again, I'm setting these up on separate tracks. And let's see here, give myself a reverb. I really like Altiverb a lot. I use it for all kinds of things. I find it to be one of the more natural, true sounding reverbs to my ear. And then let's see, we'll get us a little delay going. Let's see, where's my little buddy here? So this is a little funny. This is a plug-in emulation of an Echoplex. I've got a real one of these, and we used it on the session, and that was that delay that I showed you earlier. But I think it'd be nice to show you through the process of how I kind of figure this stuff out. So so we've got a second reverb. This is for the vocals, and keep in mind there are no rules here. I can send, it doesn't just have to be for the vocals. I can send stuff to different places, but in this case that's what I'm using it for. So let's see, we'll do bus 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 for my reverb and my delay. So we'll create us a send here on the vocals for the reverb, and we'll do another one here for the delay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to start with the vocal reverb, and I'm going to give it a decent amount of volume so we can really hear what's going on here. So I was talking about plates earlier. This is a plate setting on a vocal, and you can see here, like, let's see. You can see here it's actually a big metal plate. This is, of course, a plug-in emulation of it. But that's what it is. You go to some studios, they'll have a giant one of these. I mean, the thing is like the size of a couch. And it's a classic vocal sound. Let's give it a listen.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old machinery. He said, if you're gonna cut down a tree,
real smooth reverb.
make it into a thing of beauty. As I grow wiser in my age, I will find words to fill the empty.
Now, I really like that sound. I think it treats their vocals nicely. Now, of course, you might want to shop around for different reverbs, different settings, that kind of thing. I've got some that are some of my favorites that I'll just bring up a lot of the time that will often do what I'm looking for. And the more you do this, the more you'll have those effects that you really love, which is both a blessing and a curse. You know, it's great to have ones that are kind of your go-tos quick in a situation, or that just simply do the thing that you want to hear quickly. You know, that's great. But also you want to be careful about not getting into a rut and using the same plugin all the time. I find myself doing that a lot. I'll have certain reverbs that I just love that I use a lot, and sometimes I'll have to kind of consciously go, you know, should I shop around and see if something else suits it? And the answer is sometimes, yeah, wow, I found that other one that I didn't even think of, and that's really nice. Cool, I'm doing something different on this song. Other times, like, no, the sound in my head is that one that I had on it first. And, you know, you also want to be careful of not overthinking things. You know what I mean? Like, you don't necessarily want to do something different just for the purpose of doing something different. You want to honor the song and make sure you're doing what works for that, you know? And so, so sometimes the sound in my head is that same reverb that I've used a million times, but you know what? That's fine. How many records were done at studios that had a plate reverb that plate reverb's on all the recordings? You know, you listen to Motown and the old stuff done in Detroit, they had what was called a chamber reverb in their attic, which is actually a reverberant space with some microphones and speakers in, and you'll play a sound through the space and capture what that sound sounds like. And you can do this yourself. If you got a reverberant space, a stairwell, a shower, anything like that, you can play stuff back through it. You can put a speaker in there and a microphone, and get some natural acoustic reverb, which is really cool. And it gets you a sound you can't find anywhere else. But that attic at Motown is on a million records. If you go to Detroit and take the Motown tour, which I highly recommend, it's incredible. They have underneath the attic where the reverb chamber is, they have a hole cut in the ceiling. You can stand underneath it and like snap your fingers, you clap your hands, whatever, shout, and you can hear that reverb. And sure enough, like you snap your fingers and that's My Girl. It's that's the sound. It's on a million other records. So it's not a bad thing to have kind of your own characteristic sounds as an engineer and that sort of thing too. But be careful about getting into ruts and that kind of thing, and make sure that you're not just doing stuff because it's easy, but because it's actually the sound that you're looking for. Anyway, so I like this reverb sound. I'm going to turn it down a little bit, just make it a little subtler.
My father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old machinery.
Now, I'm just looking for a touch of it. I don't want to go like this. Maybe on some songs you do, sure. But on this one, I want this song to sound kind of present and intimate. That's the vibe that I'm getting from it. I don't want it to sound real washy or, grandiose or anything. But I just like a little bit of this reverb. So I'm just going to try to keep it in there subtly. Just like, I like to think of it as a little halo around the sound. Then I'll turn it off. Back on. Nice. And then I've also got this delay. Now, a lot of times you use delays in subtle ways as well. Of course, there's the big classic trailing delay. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that we often call a slapback delay, which is a really fast kind of one-time instance. It's not a big trail of delays. It's a one-time instance that happens right after the sound. I don't know that this song needs it or not because the vocals are doubled and they already have some movement in time along to them already. But I'm curious to hear what this sounds like. So you know what? Maybe instead of this guy, let me bring up a reverb that has got some. I love the sound of this one, and it might be what I would go for a lot of the time. But let's try a delay that has maybe some more standard settings. So if you don't have this one, you can kind of do something similar. So. Okay, so slapback delay. Feedback on most delays is kind of like the amount of repeats that you get. I'm going to turn this all the way down because I just want one repeat. This is the Waves H delay. A lot of controls on here are real common for all kinds of different delay programs and that kind of thing. So what you see here, you'll find in all kinds of things. Let's see here. This has different settings, different tone stuff, but little bells and whistles that we don't necessarily need right now. The main thing that we need is the feedback or the amount of delays, as well as let's see, is there a wet dry blend? There is. We want this to be 100% wet. What this means, if you're not familiar, is dry is unaffected and wet is the effect. So if I wanted to put this delay right on the vocal track, then I would have some, I'd be able to use that as a blend between how much of the dry vocal versus how much of the delay we're hearing. But I want to set this up differently. I have this on its own fader to kind of be able to blend in. So I want this setting to be 100% wet so that this fader is just the delay sound and none of the original vocal. And then there's the delay time here. Let's see. I'm going to do this in milliseconds because a lot of delay plugins talk milliseconds. There are different ways to do this. If you have a click track or a metronome in your session and you have your session set to a certain BPM, a lot of times you can just go ahead and select your delay to follow your session's BPM. What I'm talking about here is the timing of the delay. A lot of times I like to start with the delay kind of timed to the rhythm of the track. I might change that, but it's a good starting point. If you have a metronome or a click track, a lot of times your plugin will just let you make this follow that click. But what if you don't? What if you don't have a click track? So what I'll do is I'll use my phone and use a metronome or a tap tempo function or something to try to get an idea of what the BPM of the song is. So let me bring something up here. Cool, let's listen to it for a second. And I've got a tap tempo here, and I'm going to try to kind of ballpark what the tempo of the song is. And then I'm holding up to the mic so you can hear. I'm trying to get it close to the rhythm of the song. A little fast. Slow down a little bit. Start on the beat again. Cool, that sounds pretty good. Now, if you got a live band that's playing, like this was done to a drum machine, so the tempo is going to be pretty consistent. But if you had a live band that wasn't playing to a click or something like that, this might move, and that's okay. You're just kind of looking for an average. You're looking for a ballpark. In this case, this guy's telling me it's about 92 BPM. Great. So what do? In this plugin, I can enter a BPM here. But a lot of plugins you can't. So what I like to use, let me find this here. You can find this stuff online, and I'll bring it over to my window here. You can just search BPM to millisecond chart or conversion, something like this. This is a really handy tool, and of course you can probably find apps in your phone or whatever that will tell you all of this. But I've got this guy saved. It's real easy to find. 92 BPM right here. And then it's going to tell me the milliseconds of different timings of it. I want a real short delay for this slapback. Sorry, we're on 92 here. So I'm going to look over to 1/16th. If the song was at a faster tempo, we might be looking at an eighth or something like that. But I kind of want it to be pretty quick delay. So 163 milliseconds. Let's go back over here and we'll just let us type that in. No, we have to move it. Okay. Sometimes you can just click on it and type it in, but in this case, you got to move the knob. So let's see here. 163. Oops, come on. There we go. I mean, a hundredth of a millisecond isn't going to matter, but let's be exact about it. Why not? Cool. So let's hear this. So I have it real loud now just to show you. But the way that I would mix this is usually real subtle. I'm going to turn it all the way down, and I'm going to bring the mix back up because once again, if I establish this volume soloed, it's going to change when I'm playing the band anyway. So let's just start with the band. I'm going to turn off the reverb for a second just so you can just hear that delay. As I grow wiser with my age, I will find words to fill the empty page. True to the man who raised me. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. So the way that I'm thinking about this slapback delay is I don't want this to be real obvious as an effect. I don't even want people to think about the effects. I just want it to be I think of it as like a little shadow behind the vocal. Just a little quick reflection to just kind of give it some three-dimensionality. And then, kind of similar to what I'm thinking about with the reverb. So let's hear them both together. A father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew. He built it out of and now that I have that delay in, I might turn down the reverb just a touch. So this is some really subtle effects in here, but you do this stuff all the time in mixing. Now, obviously, we might on a different kind of tune, maybe want to put on a big, huge, washy, angelic reverb or something like that, or a big noticeable trailing delay. But in mixing all the time, you're doing these subtle little things that you wouldn't even notice that are there until you take them away. Let me play this track now again, and I'll turn the reverb and delay off on the vocals. My father had a sawmill on the farm where I Back on.
machinery. He said if you're gonna cut down a tree,
Back off.
make it into a thing of beauty.
Back on.
As I grow wiser in my age, I will find words to do.
I might even turn it down a little bit.
True to the men who raised
Back off.
now I see the skin of a tree.
Back on.
and the empty page.
So you can definitely hear a difference when I turn this on and off. But if you're just listening to this mix with those effects in there, you might even say, oh, that's a dry vocal. And, you know, relatively speaking, it's a dry vocal compared to a lot of them, compared to a lot of productions. But no, it's not. There's a couple little subtle touches going on here that are giving the vocal just a little bit of movement, a little bit of three-dimensionality. And you're doing this stuff in mixes all the time. A real common trick on mixes to make a chorus really pop is to do something like take that quick slapback delay and have that just come in at the choruses. So the verses are a little bit more intimate and that kind of thing. And then the chorus comes in and there's a real subtle little slapback delay on the vocal. Not enough that you go, oh, there's an effect now, but something that just makes it pop just a little bit. It can bring in an energy to the chorus or like make it just sound a little bit bigger, that kind of thing. And people do this all the time, especially in pop and rock productions, hip hop productions, that kind of thing. Doing something to give those choruses a little pop, a little bit of flavor, make them stand out a little bit, feel a little more epic. And sometimes you're doing those in really obvious ways, and other times you're doing these tiny little touches that really have a strong subliminal effect on the listener. I don't know if subliminal is the right term, but a subtle effect. Another great tool here. So you saw that I timed this delay to the track. This is a great starting point for something that kind of fits in rhythmically with the song. But you don't have to be chained to that BPM. You can move this timing around. And sometimes it's a really powerful tool. Say you're trying to bring a little bit of energy to a track. You could take that delay and you could speed it up just ever so slightly. Not so much so it sounds real out of time with the track, but you do something that just pushes the rhythm just a little bit, and it can add, just a few milliseconds sometimes. And it can add this energy to the track that's really nice in a subtle way. Inversely, you can slow it down a little bit if you're trying to make something sound a little mellow or dreamier or something. Go ahead and slow down that delay just a touch, and it can kind of make the song feel like it's dragging just a little bit in a good way if that's intentionally what you're trying to do. Make it sound a little dreamier, a little bit trippier or something. Something that kind of gets a little weird. That kind of thing, which obviously you can do it very upfront ways, but sometimes it's these subtle little touches that can really change the feel of a track. I was watching a mix dissection of a rock track recently where the engineer took the bass and moved it all ahead a few milliseconds. So it was rushing and it was on top of the beat a little bit. Just a hair, not enough that it sounded out of time, but sure enough, it made the song just come alive with this energy, just pushing the bass on top of the beat. The bass was right on the beat. The bass player played right in the pocket, but moving the whole thing just a few milliseconds just all of a sudden made the track have this awesome energy. And I had never thought about that. It was a song by the band Hole that it was really into a few of their records in the 90s. A song called Celebrity Skin by Hole. They're dissecting this rock track. And sure enough, the engineer A-B'd the song with the bass in time, the bass just rushing the beat a little bit. And man, it made a difference. The whole song had this energy when the bass was on top of the beat that didn't have the other way around. And this was so interesting to me because so much of the time we're working so hard to make everything exactly in time. But damn if this song didn't sound better with the bass rushing. It just really did. And it was kind of a little important lesson in making sure you have some humanity in there. And of course, this kind of a funny, ironic thing that they deliberately moved the bass out of time to make it sound more natural. I get that that's an ironic thing, but man, it sure felt more like a rock tune when it was rushing the beat. So don't feel chained and when I say rushing the beat, I mean the bass was still in time with the BPM. It was just a little ahead of the downbeat, just a hair. And so don't be afraid to mess with this. You don't have to stay chained to the grid. You can mess with this stuff and all of a sudden bring in different flavors into what you're working on. So cool. There's some effects stuff. Let's see. We're in the home stretch here. We got about 20 minutes before we got to get out of the way for let's see. We got Jordan coming up next, right? Jordan's going to be talking about all kinds of looping and effects stuff. So all of you gearhead geeks out there, stay tuned for that. It's going to be phenomenal, I'm sure. I've seen Jordan do this workshop many times, and it's brilliant. Yeah, and also a reminder that we are collecting donations for the Earthwork farm. You'll see the PayPal and Venmo links at the bottom of the screen there. If you have the means, please do chip in. That land and everything about it means so much to so many of us, and it's a really difficult thing that we can't be there together this year, but I'm so grateful to Seth and Ben and Pastor Justin and everybody that have helped facilitate this online virtual harvest gathering this year. But what they're missing is that fundraising aspect for the farm that they really rely on. So if you're into what's going on here and you have the means, please do chip in. It's going to go to a great cause and something that means so much to so many of us. And yeah, so keep that in mind. Let's see if anybody has any questions here in the home stretch. I can jump around and address some things. Let's hear. Chris Schluter wrote in, "Hey Chris, how you doing?" Let's see. I often struggle to get bass guitar to be the right volume in a mix. Any tips on compression and how to use it to help with the mix? Absolutely. Let's talk about bass for a little bit. Bass can be a really challenging thing in a mix or just in life. Bass is crazy, which if you've ever tried to play a venue that isn't treated right and you get all kinds of crazy boomy bass, or you're trying to soundproof your room and the bass sure doesn't care about your soundproofing and go right on out there. And then getting bass to work in a mix. So let's mentally zoom back out and let's think about the bass a little bit. I'm going to go where the bass comes in and let's take a listen.
As I grow wiser in my age, I will find words to fill the empty page. True to the men who raised me. Now I see the skin of a tree and leave the empty page. Leave the page empty.
Cool. So this bass, it's already sounding pretty decent to me, the way it's in here. We might have done some stuff this live. I bet we did. Usually when I'm recording in Pro Tools, this comment section down at the bottom of the screen, I'll put my chains in here, what mic I'm using, any EQ or compression I'm doing on the way in. In this case, we tracked the song to the tape machine, then dumped it into Pro Tools. So I have those notes on paper somewhere, but not in the Pro Tools session. So we might have been doing some EQ and compression live with the bass, but let's talk about this. So the first thing I want to talk about with bass is making room for the bass. I keep talking about how important space is in a mix, and that is shown more than anything else in your low end and your bass frequencies. The first thing you can do to try to get the bass more audible in a mix is to carve some bass out of the other instruments in your mix. I know this sounds inverse. I want a stronger bass in my song, so I'm supposed to take bass away. But yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you, it is a mistake that a lot of people, myself included, made earlier in my career, and that I still struggle with from time to time, is the idea of I want more bass in the song, so I'm just going to crank up the bass. We need the bass to be heavier, so I'm going to get EQ more bass into my bass, or raise up the bass, or sometimes it's let's put on some other bass instruments and really raise that up. And you think about that for obvious reasons, but I'll tell you, as soon as I started thinking about it differently and started making room for the bass instead of adding more bass on, it got so much clearer and better. And so what you'll hear people talk a lot about are low cut filters or high pass filters. They're two names for the same thing, low cut or high pass. And I will put those on other instruments to get some low end out of the way of the other instruments and let the bass or the kick drum or whatever, low end of the piano, whatever the bass is in your mix, give that some room for itself to shine and have some clarity. In this song, I'm not hearing a whole lot of low end mud out of the other instruments, but I'll show you the process here. So like for instance, with the Wurlitzer here, let's see. Maybe we'll go to the electric guitar. So I've got the electric guitar on 2 tracks here, so I might have to do this twice. But let's solo up the guitar. So you'll see here on my screen, let me get this out of the way here. Most of the guitar signal, so this is the Fab Filter EQ plugin. Let me tell you, I love Fab Filter stuff. If you're looking for some relatively affordable plugins to add to your DAW, I can't recommend Fab Filter enough. If you start looking at one of my mixes that has a bunch of stuff on it, you'll see tons of Fab Filter stuff. I don't have an endorsement deal from them, but please give me one if anybody from Fab Filter is listening, because I use their stuff all the time. The EQ, the compression, the multiband compression, the peak limiter, all that stuff is so great. Big fan of Fab Filter. So on this Fab Filter EQ, you'll see your low to high, bass to treble. This is not a linear graph. It is weighted, and you'll see here, like, this is 100 hertz all the way over here. And so, if you look down at the bottom here, you'll see the different frequencies here listed. And when I say it's not linear, I mean, it is weighted towards the low end. Like, this is 20 hertz. This is 50 hertz. So if I'm doing something to the low end, it looks more extreme than it actually is. Because the low end takes up so much space in the graph here. So be mindful of that. So we'll take a low cut filter, and on this guitar, most of what's going on this guitar is like 200-ish hertz and up. The stuff going on below there, we don't really need that much. Now, this enters back into what I was talking about before at the beginning of this, when I was talking about making space for stuff in a mix. And if I'm mixing a song that is just guitar and vocals, I might treat that guitar very differently than if I'm doing it as an element of part of a larger mix. If this song didn't have bass in it, maybe I don't want to carve out that bass. Maybe I want that guitar to take up all the space. But I want this thing to work along with the bass and leave some room for the bass to be able to poke out and have some clarity. Soloed this guitar, maybe you bring in this low cut filter and you go, oh, it sounds a little fuller without the low cut filter, but it doesn't matter what it sounds like soloed. It matters what it sounds like in the mix. So I just have this on one side here. I have this guitar in stereo. Okay, now it's on both sides. So if I go ahead and bypass it, it's carving out a little bit of that real low end, but very little. It still sounds really full and good, and the stuff that I'm carving out is honestly stuff that's not really helping us very much. And it's leaving all of this room for the bass. Let's bring the bass in here. Now, this guitar already didn't have a lot of low-end mud, so this demonstration here is not going to be nearly as obvious as if I had a guitar with a lot more low-end information going on in it. The tone that we're getting out of the amp was a little bit brighter. Brandon probably had his, I don't know what pickup he was on here or what, but you know what I mean? Like we are already getting a little bit brighter of a guitar tone, so we don't have all that low-end kind of mud to get out of there with this. But, the process here and thinking about it like this is the important thing. I'm clearing room out of the other instruments to leave room for the bass to shine. And the more that I do that, the more that it helps the clarity of the bass and being able to really, be able to have it present in the mix without having to mix it super loud. You can have it not muddy up your mix, but still be really noticeable and powerful and that kind of thing. And I'll do this to all kinds of instruments. I'm throwing low cuts on just about everything that I can besides the bass instruments these days. And sometimes they're low cuts that are not nearly this high. Sometimes they're way down here, maybe more like 50 hertz, 100 hertz, whatever. Maybe they're up real high. Someone's doing a tambourine overdub. We don't need anything below 200, 300 hertz in that tambourine. Come on, get all that stuff out of there. Whether it is low end kind of blurry stuff that is going to muddy up your bass, or whether it's just simply stuff that's not even in the frequency range of those instruments and really just going to be getting some room sound, or I don't mean reverb, but I mean like some, hum or footsteps or, whatever stuff you don't want in there. Throw on low cuts, get all that stuff out of there, clean up your low end. That's the first thing that you can do to get some clarity to the bass, or your kick or whatever your low end stuff is in the mix. EQ wise, what to talk about? Let's see. Well, in this case, I'm already really happy with the bass tone, but let's give it a listen. So we haven't talked about EQ at all yet here, and of course we're starting to run out of time. But let me just show you an EQ approach that I do that really helps me a lot. So say with this bass, say we wanted to bring some more like attack out of it, some more presence. So we want to find something that's in kind of the higher range of the bass for a little bit more of that pluck, I'm not one of those engineers that can just pick a frequency out of the air all the time. Certain ones I can, ones that I run into all the time, and ones that haunt me. Yes, those I know, but I'm not one to be able to hear a sound and say, oh, it needs this frequency without being able to try it out sometimes. And oftentimes that's the case. Sometimes people ask me, like, what frequencies do you like to boost in a bass or whatever, a guitar? And the thing is, I recommend not thinking about audio like this. It is not a one-size-fits-all situation. It is a moving target, and this stuff changes all the time. Where's the muddiness in that guitar? Well, that depends on the guitar. It depends on the guitarist. It depends on the key of the song. Like, that stuff is moving around all the time. Now, that being said, yes, there are certain things that are common things you run into, but where the warmth is on that instrument you're mixing might change depending on a great number of factors. Where the presence is might change on a great number of factors. So don't think about this like, I'm trying to learn what frequencies to cut to make things sound better, or what frequencies to boost to make this instrument sound better. Think about it as learning how to approach different sounds with your own toolkit as an audio engineer, and how to find what the problems are with that and solve them. So in this case, what I do a lot of the time with EQ is I will take a band, and so with EQ, you have your frequency that you're cutting or boosting, the gain, which is the amount of boost or cut. So the frequency, the gain, and then Q or bandwidth. And what that means is the width of the adjustment that you're making. It can be a real wide change that you're making that is a really big change, or it can be really small and surgical. It just depends on the circumstance. So I'll take something with a smallish but not super small bandwidth or Q, and I'll boost it like crazy. And I will start to try to find, in this case, I want to find the attack of this bass. So let's boost it like mad. And let's sweep around. It's going to sound weird. Okay, so here we go. We're around 330 hertz approximately. This sounds kind of crazy and stupid on its own, but this is an element of the bass that has a little bit more attack to it. So now that I've found that, I can bring the EQ back down to a more reasonable level. And just bring up that attack a little bit. I'll bypass it here. Back in. Great. And so then this same technique can work the other way. When I say the other way, I mean trying to find a frequency you want to carve out of there. When you're EQing stuff, I highly recommend that you don't just think about raising things. Sometimes cutting stuff is more effective than raising stuff. Often it is. For instance, you have a sound that is thin and needs some warmth. Yeah, maybe you need to find some warm frequencies in the low mids or the lows and boost those. But maybe the answer is to find what those harsh frequencies are and duck them. Or maybe it's a combination of the two. But, I'll tell you, it's a common mistake to open up someone's EQ and to see a whole bunch of boosts, right? Something like that. But often that's not helping. Often, if you're having to boost a whole ton of stuff, really what you probably should have done was find some stuff to cut. cut a few things or one thing or whatever. Let's I'm going to come back to the bass, Chris. I'm going to talk a little bit more about compression in just a second here, but I want to show this cutting technique with the vocal, because to my ear, there's a little bit of thinness here with the vocal.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old.
So there's a little bit of mid-range that's coming through on Brandon's vocal here. So keep in mind there's two vocals here. I'm just going to solo one for a second. Come on. There we go. I'm going to put in the middle just for a minute. So it's, that's wasting time. I'll just leave it panned. So I'm going to boost this like mad and try to find that mid-range harsh frequency that's kind of bothering me. This is going to sound horrible for a minute. I apologize, Brandon. Your vocal's about to get kind of weird here, but this is such an effective technique.
Father had a sawmill on the farm where I grew up. He built it out of old.
There we go.
Machinery.
There's that telephone sound I want to dial back a little bit. So now that I found the thing that's bothering me, I'm going to go ahead and peel it back a little bit.
Father had a sawmill on the farm.
Great. That sounds smoother to me. Yes, I'm doing this soloed, but that's because we're almost out of time and I'm just trying to move fast. Often I would do this in the mix. But just showing you some techniques here real quick. So I've taken out that in this case, 1.1K-ish area. The thing is, the vocal sounds a little dull to me now that I took that out. So I'm going to raise a little bit of high end to replace it. Mute it.
He built it out of old.
Sorry, bypass the EQ. Then back on.
He said, if you're gonna cut.
So what I'm doing here is a technique that I like to call refocusing EQ. And this isn't really a technical term or anything. It's just a way that I kind of made up to talk about how I approach things. I'm refocusing that high end to an area that's more flattering to me. So I cut high mids really, but the point is I cut something that was bothering me, but then the vocal sounded a little dull. So I found a frequency area that was more flattering to me and I brought that up in its place. I refocused the presence of the vocal to a frequency range that was more flattering to that vocal to my ear. I'll do this all the time in all kinds of ways. There's a frequency in the low end that's muddy that's bothering me, so I'll carve that out, but then I'm losing a little bit of the low end, so I'll go searching for a different low end frequency that suits that element of the mix, the bass or the kick drum or guitar or whatever it is, that sounds a little bit better on that instrument. I'll bring that up in its place. So I'm not just cutting, I'm refocusing the low end to a range that's a little bit more pleasing to me. And so I'll do that all over the place. A combination of a cut and boost can be really powerful. So we're almost in the home stretch here. I guess there's probably not really time. I was going to talk some about compression, but there's not really time for that here. I've got to wrap this up. But if there's any quick questions, go ahead and hit me up on the chat. I'm also always happy to talk about this stuff, at any point in time. Walk in me on the street or send me a text or something. Always happy to lend advice. Also, at risk of sounding like I'm promoting myself, I also do private lessons in audio. And during times that we can gather, which I look forward to soon, we do workshops at the studio and stuff. So I love teaching and talking about this stuff. I'm happy to help you out further if you have questions and that kind of thing. And I'm really grateful to Seth and Pastor Justin and Ben and everybody that has helped make this virtual harvest gathering happen this year. It's a whole team of people working really hard behind the scenes. And so great to be able to spend this time here with you. If you have any last questions, let me know in the chat here. Otherwise, we will wrap this up and get ready for Jordan Hamilton, who will be here at 4 to talk about pedal boards and looping and all that good stuff. So thank you, everybody, so much for spending some time with me, and hope you got something good out of it.